Welcome to the Red Sneaker Podcast, your guide to success in the worlds of writing and publishing. Now, here's your host, best-selling author and founder of the Red Sneaker Writers Center, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. This is episode 20, going out on June 3rd, 2019. This podcast is for Red Sneaker Writers, people who are serious about building a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them do it. Guess what? I'm on vacation this week. Right now, I'm in the midst of an extended road trip with the kids. So, if you'll forgive me just this once, I'm going to skip the news, but I do want to present a very special interview, one of my favorites I've ever done, with my dear friend and partner, Rene Gutteridge. Some of you will already recognize that name from the WriterCon webpage, because she's one of my partners in WriterCon, the annual writers conference in Oklahoma City over Labor Day weekend, which I highly recommend to every one of you. But Rene has had an outstanding writing career in her own right. She has done numerous novels for the Christian book market, which, by the way, is one of the few growth areas in the book world right now. She's written screenplays and novelizations for Hallmark. She's currently working full-time as a comedy writer. Her story, how she's jumped from genre to genre, even though people say you can't, and how she's managed to keep swimming in the sometimes challenging book world, is to me an inspiration. Here's what Rene had to say. Rene, thanks for being on the podcast.
I am so happy to be here.
Okay, first question. What is the best piece of advice you would offer someone who aspires to write?
Well, I used to have this written above my monitor, and I still think it's the best that you can give somebody. BIC, B-I-C, butt in chair.
Right. Particular frequency in mind?
Often.
Yeah.
Probably early.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I'm a morning person. Not everybody is,
That's
I guess.
right.
But I can't conceive, by late afternoon, I'm not in my most creative mode.
Yeah.
You get up in the morning too and get at it?
Well, since I write professionally, I have all day, but I cram all of my creative work in the morning,
Right.
and emails and admin later in the day.
Right.
But when I was younger, I could do 2 a.m. I mean, the older I get, the worse things are. But
I'm thinking I could do 2 a.m. I just don't want to.
Yeah.
I know that's not going to be my best work, too.
Exactly.
Okay. You have published awesome quantities of books, 24 books, right?
Yes.
In the Christian market.
Yes.
How did that happen? How'd you break in?
Well, I decided that in my early 20s, I wanted to start writing fiction. And so I one day got a postcard back when people used to send postcards in the mail about a writers conference. And so I went to a writers conference, and then I went to another one, and then I went to another one, and I kept going. And eventually I learned the craft and then pitched a book to an editor on a writing cruise. And that's how it all began. It was a writer's retreat on a cruise.
Wow. And that panned out for you.
That panned out for me, yep.
Was it a good cruise other than that? I mean, it was as soon as you sold something, probably.
I was pregnant and seasick and morning sick. So something good came out of it, but the cruise wasn't part of it.
Always a silver lining, though.
That's right.
Okay, now, seriously, are you saying you hadn't thought about being a writer till you were in your early 20s?
Well, what I was interested in was screenwriting. And so as a young person, I did read a lot, tons of novels, but I started looking in my teens into screenwriting, and that's kind of what my dream landed on. But being from Oklahoma in the early 90s, there wasn't a film scene. And that's when I switched over and thought, well, I should try the novel writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes, at least in my own case, although that would probably be fun, I think I would probably be miserable because at least miserable at it because I mean, you can write a novel essentially by yourself.
Yes.
You may have input from others, but, making a movie on the other end, that's major collaborative. And, we taught on that at the conference, that you have to switch your mind into a collaborative writing mindset if you've been in novels and going to screenplays, because it's a big group of people who have a lot of influence on the story. Now, did you decide, because you may well have planned your career much better than I ever did, but did you say in advance, I'm going after the Christian market, or how did that happen?
No, I didn't even know there was a Christian market when I started. I didn't understand there were actually two separate markets, a general market and a Christian market. But it started making sense for me, and I decided, okay, I'm going to learn about this market over here. And it turned out it was a very large market, has its own distribution system, has its own bookstores. Mm-hmm. So, it worked out for me, and I'm glad I did it.
And that was how long ago?
Well, my first contract was in 1999.
Because the Christian book market is still thriving. In fact, I think it's one of the healthiest at this point in time. Yeah,
I mean, it's still doing well, and I'm glad that it is.
Okay, 24 books. Some of those are connected in some way, are they not? Tell me some titles. Tell me what's connected to what.
Well, I've got the Storm series, which is suspense, and that's got 3 books in it: The Splitting Storm, Storm Gathering, and Storm Surge. And then I do comedy, so I did 2 comedy series: the Boo series, which has 4 books, and the Occupational Hazard series, which has 3 books, and one of those is a movie that I made, an independent film we made in Oklahoma called Skid.
Right. It sounds like these books kind of cross genres. I mean, yes, Christian books, but different genres. Am I right about that?
They're different genres, which everybody will tell you absolutely never do.
Right.
Never.
Unless you can.
It does split your readership. So it was very risky for me, but I just never could find one genre that I wanted to stay in, and that's the screenwriting background. Screenwriters are not genre writers. Screenwriters cross genres. We go after stories. So that kind of influenced, and I think it did have some negative side effects to my sales. I had a split readership, so anybody following me would either choose comedy or suspense, so, but I was a happy writer.
Yeah. Well, and that counts for a lot, too.
It does.
I've written things that would not have been my publisher's choice at times, too, but I mean, you just can't write the same thing over and over. I suppose you can, actually, but who wants to?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not why we started. Were all those books under your own name?
They were.
Did you ever think about, well, this one's humor, so maybe I should use a, funny name or a different name or something?
Well, hindsight, maybe that would have worked better for me. And I might do that if I ever cross over into the general market. That might be a good time to just kind of start over and, go that way. But no, I mean, I just kept my name, and it's not a great writer's name. Rene Gutteridge. It's very clunky, and they always had trouble figuring out how to fit it on the cover. And I did a book with a guy named Rick Swartzwelder, and they were just kind of like, we don't understand how to make this all fit.
Have you considered a pen name?
Exactly.
I recall my last name only has 9 letters, but they were hesitant. They just said, well, this is a paperback. It won't fit. Can we at least get rid of your middle initial? So I gave them that.
Oh, you did?
Take out the middle
funny.
Initial. Now, your last name's got 11 letters, so you're really pushing it.
Yeah, it was clunky. And Rick spelled his name R-I-K. And so the big joke was that he had to drop off the C for it to all fit. He had already dropped it off, but it was just funny because his name is spelled R-I-K. Like we had to drop a letter off to.
That's funny. Plus, now I have to, just so people won't think I'm a complete idiot, I recounted in my head 10 letters in your last name, right?
Well, I was impressed
there to be 2 R's, but there's only 1.
I have no idea how many letters are in my last name. I was pretty impressed that you came up with that at the top of your head. Seriously.
No, I was trying to make gutter and ridge 2 different words, but they're not. There's one R in the middle.
Okay, I'll take your word for that.
So are you thinking you might go into the general market at some point?
I have. I've thought about it. I love the Christian market, and it's been great, but it has some restrictions, and it doesn't have as many opportunities for different kinds of genres that appeal to me. So
I think people would like to know more about that. What are the restrictions?
Okay.
Because it may not be what people would assume. What can you do and not do in the Christian book market?
Right. I mean, some of it's pretty interesting, and as it's grown, it's become a little more liberal in what it's allowed, but generally it has to be clean. That's pretty much across the board.
Meaning no profanity?
No profanity, no sex scene, nothing gratuitous. Violence seems to be fine.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But, it's just something that you could give somebody and feel safe about giving to them. So,
can you acknowledge the existence of sex in?
Depending on the publisher,
Really?
some publishers, yes, some publishers, no. There's just real extremes on both sides. Depending on which house owns the imprint, influences that.
Really?
So some of the houses that are independent and not owned by, say, Random House have tighter restrictions. So you just have to know. I mean, some of them are they're interesting, and they're getting, I think, better. Not that, we're trying to push the envelope on anything, but
Right.
Sometimes those restrictions do hinder some of the storytelling that we
Sure.
want to do.
I mean, does it matter how it comes out? I mean, can you have an unwed mother if it turns out well in the end, or
Now you can.
somebody learns their lesson, or
That's
whatever?
right. Yeah. And I think the one thing that the Christian market has done better in the last 10 to 15 years is what used to be Christian fiction, or what it used to entail, is sometimes just a platform to preach. And that kills the storytelling.
Sure.
Story should be king every time. So now there's a better understanding of, you can have a faith element, a faith thread, a Christian character, whatnot, but you can't get rid of the realities of life. And merging those two things has increased the sales. It's brought in new readership and allowed for the Christian worldview to reflect reality, because it's like there's just things that are real. And
Right.
If we're not acknowledging them in our literature, we're certainly doing a disservice to art and life.
That makes sense to me, and plus, whatever kind of field or market you're writing for, story is paramount, right?
That's right.
If you're not telling a good story, it doesn't matter what you've got to say.
That's right. And so I think in the Christian market, what has emerged is the understanding of that story is paramount, and it doesn't diminish the faith. It doesn't diminish what anybody's trying to do. It just makes better art.
Okay, now I want to touch on, at least, you mentioned before when you started out, you were interested in screenwriting, and that's kind of what you're doing now, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, through a 20-year writing career, doors began opening actually kind of through novelizations, and kind of opened me back to the possibility of getting back into film. And in 20 years, suddenly there's a film scene in Oklahoma.
Right.
And so those two things have allowed me to kind of get back into doing that, and I've enjoyed it.
That's true. See, you ended up eventually getting to be where you thought you'd be in the first place.
Yeah, and better for it. 20 years of writing fiction now makes me a screenwriter that can compete.
Sure.
I'm a better storyteller, and that counts for a lot.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, that's just terrific. Rene, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Rene, for that wonderful interview. One of my favorite people, inside or outside of the book world. Now, I mentioned WriterCon earlier, which Rene and I and others partner to put on each year. To get more information about that, visit the webpage writercon.org. We've got an outstanding lineup of agents, writers, editors, and more.